Hi, Eliza. Welcome. And welcome, everyone. Again, this is Marc Mukunda with Mukunda Studio, and this is our community discussion, the first one with the studio, and the topic is 100% mixed, and I'm very excited that you're all part of this. I do want to just go over a little bit of housekeeping. Once again, is that we are recording, so make sure you choose your screen and your name. And also, if you do have any questions or comments, to place them in the chat box so we can keep track and help you remember. We will have a time where there'll be a Q&A session, and you'll be welcome to raise your real hand or your virtual hand to ask a question at that point. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen as we get started here. And you're also, I think most of you know Zoom quite well. You can either click it to be on, to pin my screen, or have the gallery, so the speaker or the gallery view, whatever you choose. All right, I'm going to move some of these boxes off to the side here. So again, this is part of our community discussion, which has a new name, EmpowerHour, as part of Mukunda Studio, EmpowerHour. So this will become a monthly series. This first one we're sharing is called 100% Mixed. And I'm excited that you're getting to join. Before we jump into the topic and our time together for this hour, just wanted to share some community guidelines. We wish to invoke a space that is 100% mixed. And that means in every which way, all of us have mixtures we're bringing into this, whether it's thought, race, feeling, energy, etc. We wish to invoke a space that is courageous and kind, filled with the power of diversity, welcoming to everyone here and beyond. So I want us to be thoughtful about even maybe some of the people in the world that aren't here, that when we talk, we speak mindfully about everyone. Supportive to feelings and emotions, inspired to take action for good efforts, and that this space is also joyful and intentional. I also want to offer that we bring open eyes, open hearts, and open minds. May this gathering provide inspiration, healing, creativity, or even just a good hour of our time together. If you need to leave early, it's the divine will, and we're happy you could be here for any time that you have given. And then finally, just ask, once I move the slide down, that we look around at your fellow participants and feel the miracle of being gathered in this space together. So on that note, I'd like to go ahead and move over to our introductions. My name is Marc Morozumi, as most of you know, and I am the owner and director of Mukunda Studio. I also have Nikki Robbins here, Cleo Altieri, and Rachel Porraspita. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the screen share. And I'd like to start with a little bit of a sharing from me, and then we'll go around the circle of our panel. As I shared, this is the first community discussion. And a big part of why I wanted to do these for the studio is to tackle more complex issues by bringing multiple perspectives. So my hope is that throughout the year, we look at some various different themes and topics. I also want to generate more ideas around these topics of interest. Like, I can have all my own ideas in my own head, but the more we come together, we generate common energy by building ideas together. I also wish to inspire empathy by in-person sharing. I think when we hear stories from each other, it can help inspire that empathic part of ourselves. And then finally, to create accountability around learning and taking action. My hope is that these discussions inspire all of us, the panel and the participants, to think of some action steps that we can take based on these discussions. I love a good talk, but I love when we do something about it even more. So I know I need the nudge to stay involved and to be of service in the world. So this helps me stay creative and connected. So I hope this can be useful for our minds, our hearts, and with our bodies taking action in our family, our circle of friends, our community, and beyond. I was looking at a couple things to get prepared for this, and there's something I found on vox.com, an online resource, that actually it was an article that was more focused on immigrants coming into our country. And this is from an article called 7 Lessons from Psychology That Explain the Irrational Fear of Outsiders. I'm not going to go through all 7 of them, but I just wanted to name the article in case that's of interest. So I'm going to quote some from this. There's a reason every country with immigration has pockets of xenophobia. It's our instinct to be distrustful of those whom we perceive as being them rather than us. In prehistoric times, this is what kept us safe. In the modern age, it's what nudges us towards bigotry. It's what we call an over-exclusion bias, Mina Chikara, a Harvard psychologist who studies intergroup conflict, said in an interview. When you start fearing others, she says, your circle of who you counted as friends is going to shrink. And that means those people outside of the bounds get less empathy, get fewer resources. It also means you become more vigilant and obsessed with marking who is an insider and who is not. You want to draw those boundaries brighter so you don't make any mistakes about who you want to share your resources with or who you want to trust, she says. This fear can then be compounded by in-group pride. People who empathize more with their own groups tend to be more aggressive toward the out-group. Multiple studies find when most white people are reminded that minorities will eventually be the majority, they begin to feel less warm toward members of other races. It's said that in an article somewhere around, I think it's the year 2045 or so, there'll be a majority minority in the US. So it's not that far away, and it's an interesting thing to recognize, Mia, yay, to recognize, this certainly is not a new topic. Mixtures have been flowing through our country for decades and decades, and even across the planet. This has been a whole journey of mixing races, cultures, thoughts, ideas, practices. It's very much a part of how we have survived as a human race. But somewhere along the way, especially in America, it feels like the other started to become a scary thing. And what we look at and what we heard a little bit from that article, the other tends to be that thing that we're not sure what they are. If I can identify someone and they look like me, or they do something like me, or they act like me, then I feel safe. But as soon as it's something different, there's that other. Now, it doesn't always have to be negative, and I think we might hear from some of our stories. It can also become kind of ogled over, like, ooh, what is that other precious, interesting, mysterious, alluring thing? And then that can have its own effect because it's still putting us as if we were a thing instead of a human being. I grew up in Cincinnati, Ohio. And in that time, in the 70s and the 80s, it was definitely much more of a culture of black and white. And there was not a lot of diversity. My brother, who's on this Zoom call as well, we both went to a Hebrew day school. So we were also Jewish. Our mother is Jewish and we were raised Jewish. And honestly, for me, and our parents also divorced, that's another key thing. And so we grew up with our mother, who is Caucasian, who remarried our father, who is also Jewish and Caucasian. So to be honest, in a lot of ways, I felt like just a Jewish kid, growing up in Cincinnati. And we went to a Hebrew day school that was pretty much all Caucasians, or it was, not pretty much, it was all Caucasians. And then my brother and I. And I don't know, for some reason, I think we might have a little bit of different stories, but for the most part, I don't feel like there was anything that seemed odd to anyone. And I felt really grateful that there wasn't we weren't made fun of. Now, however, at some point in our third or fourth grade year, some students came from Russia. They were the other. They got picked on. And in fact, and to this day, I wish that I could find my way to apologize to them, but I also was part of the group that picked on them because they were the other. So it's interesting that I was able to blend and be part of the majority group, yet I was also, and didn't realize my own identity. And then I became one who also wasn't being very kind to people who were different than us. They were different than us because of they had an accent when they spoke to our ears. We knew that they came in from a different country. So I understood what that feeling was. I had an experience at the barber shop when I was a little kid. This was probably the first time when it really hit me. And some kid walked by the window and made his eyes like this at me. And I looked and I went, I didn't even really understand what it meant. And it wasn't until later in life that it started to become more clear to me that there's some fear that others have about the other. And I was able to also recognize my own. It's been a form of coming out, in many different ways for me through life. Certainly also growing up being gay and not being aware of what that was about until later was a huge transformational time. But also coming out as somebody who's mixed was a very inspirational and powerful time. To recognize I don't have to be, half of anything, but I can be a whole person was, as strange as it may sound, a very particular journey of healing, of acceptance, and honoring this journey on this planet, that actually that's what we all are. We just might not look like it. And so because of that experience of feeling that, I think it has created a certain kind of empathy. But what I'm interested in today is the inspiration from that and the voice that it might help create to continue talking about this as not just a topic for race, but all the ways that I see us being mixed. So with that, I just wanted to share some about myself, and I'd like to now shift over and let our panel introduce themselves for a few minutes, and then that will lead us into some discussion. So once again, I welcome everybody who's here, Eliza, Mia for joining in, and Amy, Steve, Fox, and Sita. Glad you're all here. All right, I'm going to let Nikki jump in.
Hi, everyone. Marc, thank you so much for sharing that with us, kicking off this awesome event. I'm really excited to be a part of this and to meet all of you. My name is Nikki Robbins. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm based out of Denver, but I'm born and raised in San Francisco. So I'm very familiar with IYI. My mom is still a frequent student there, and I love it so much. I think in these things, I tend to lead with what I do for work, and I'm actually going to leave that to the end because that's so much more than who I am. But I am a storyteller. I am a community creator. I like to call myself a shapeshifter. I think that's something that being mixed allows a lot of us to do, to kind of move through spaces and things in our life through this really unique, beautiful lens of being mixed. In terms of my background, similar to Marc, which is why we get along so well, I think I'm also Japanese. So I am Jewish and Japanese with a Japanese mom who immigrated from Japan, and then my dad who is a New York Jew through and through. Growing up, I was very much bilingual and bicultural. My mom was very adamant about me not learning English until I was about 3 or 4. I was raised by Japanese community members. I went to a Japanese immersion preschool and elementary school. So luckily, I was a part of the majority for that point in my life. There were a lot of other Japanese mothers, Japanese parents in general that, I would see. It was very clear to me from an early age that I was mixed. And as I started to grow older and be integrated into schools that were absolutely diverse in San Francisco at the time, but not a lot of mixed kids, my identity became kind of a game that people would play to kind of see, try to guess, what I was or what I wasn't. And I like to call myself a recovering people pleaser. As someone who was a people pleaser at the time when I was younger, I really based my identity on the way that people defined me. And that could be 6 different people in a day defining what that could look like. And so it wasn't until that I was a little bit older that I really kind of started the exercise of, well, what do I want to be? What do I want to call myself? What are the things that I know to be true that I can share with the world? And so inclusivity was something that I've always been really passionate about. Growing up in San Francisco and then seeing it change so rapidly as I kind of headed into high school and college with like the really rapid gentrification, seeing a lot of the communities of color being pushed out of their neighborhoods. It was something that I was made aware of like really early on that, we need to, Marc, you were talking about this, like the them versus us and kind of this other mentality. And it was just something that I was thinking about from a really young age, being in primarily mixed spaces, especially as a younger person. And now what I do for work is I'm a co-founder of Spectacle. We're a marketing agency, an inclusive content marketing agency that focuses on creating content through a lens of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So especially on social media, where for a really long time, it was like a lot of white, thin, cis, straight faces. I'm part of a team that really wants to change that norm so that people of all backgrounds, all identities, all mixed backgrounds can be represented in a way that they want to be represented, the stories that we need to be uplifting because they're so special, and just creating authentic communities like this where we can talk about these really real and pressing issues. So I'm really excited to be here. Thank you so much for having me, and yeah, looking forward to further conversation.
Thank you, Nikki. Yes, awesome. Let's say, Rachel, would you like to go next and introduce yourself to our group?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Rachel Porraspita. Thank you, Mukunda, for having me on this panel. It's definitely a good panel for me because while right now I am based on the West Coast, I'm in Anaheim, California. I originally was from the East Coast, so born and raised in Brooklyn, New York, and 100% mixed is definitely defines who I am. My mom is Panamanian, and she immigrated here with her family in 1968. So a long time ago, but from that side of the family, it's not just Panamanian, there's also Colombian and Nicaraguan as well. And then my dad's side, Black, mostly from the States. I would say Virginia, when he did his family tree, he found a family plantation. So originally even went back as far as slave owned in Virginia, and also on his dad's side, Kentucky. So pretty interesting. And I would say that, growing up for me in Brooklyn, it was Coney Island where I lived. So very, very urban area. School for me was filled with people that looked like me, Hispanics, Blacks, a few whites here and there. So it wasn't too hard to relate. For me, it was both, obviously. So I could kind of fit in wherever I felt the need to. I would say that mostly I experienced that feeling of being mixed as I got older. and my features started changing, and people would say, oh, well, I know you're Black, but what else are you? That whole goes back to that question of what are you? You know? And so would always have to, you know, answer questions about, you know, the other sides of me. And I think that, you know, overall, it's growing up was pretty easy to, you know, relate to those around me, but experiencing some, you know, racism as I was, you know, moving into adulthood and moving out of the sort of urban lifestyle and into other areas, you know, experiencing things in the South and just different states that I've been around, it gets to be, you know, a little bit different when it comes to that. So, yeah, that's what I would say. I would also say that, you know, I'm a mom. I have two boys right now, and they're very mixed. You know, one of them, his dad is white, and the other one, it's Hispanic, so Cuban and Dominican. So there's a lot of that also going in with my boys. And, you know, this topic starts to become, how do you raise boys into men here in America? Which it goes back to what Mukunda was saying in the beginning, where, you know, just the whole understanding that America is made up of immigrants, period. And I think that when people try to say, oh, it's us versus them, we all came here from somewhere. So at the end of the day, I mean, we talk about New York City, the melting pot of it all, everyone's from somewhere, you know? So we have to realize that sticking together is how we are going to be able to identify and see ourselves and other people, community coming together. So that's what I would say.
Yes, awesome. Thank you, Rachel. That was excellent. So grateful that you are getting to share and be a part of this panel also. And I'm glad you brought up about your boys that you're raising too, because that's just so interesting to me too, to think about the mixture that just keeps mixing and keeps mixing. It's just really powerful. All right, let's hear from Cleo. Cleo, welcome. Say hi to everybody. I'm not here. Are you all hearing her sound?
Can you hear me now?
There we go. Yes.
Okay, cool. Okay, microphone malfunction. Welcome to Mercury Retrograde. Hi. So I'm Cleo. Some of you know me because we've met already. And for the rest of you, hi, we're friends now. So I also hail from the East Coast mainly, but up and down. So mostly New York. I was actually born in Queens, but we lived mostly in the Bronx. But I've lived in Arkansas. I've lived in Florida. We've spent like small amounts of time in like Tennessee. So I kind of grew up in the backseat of a car, really doing some road trip stuff. My father was in the Air Force. So there was a lot of moving around in those first 5 years where it just made sense to me. And then we ended up on the Air Force Base in Little Rock, Arkansas. And, you know, of course, my dad is actually Haitian and speaks French. My mom is Puerto Rican and speaks Spanish. She's very light, he's very dark. But of course, when we visited the two families, there was kind of this different flavor and tonality in each one of the families. So naturally masking, I would just adapt to whichever's house I was in. Then we get into Little Rock, Arkansas, and we introduce schooling. And there comes a third mask agency of now like me experiencing other people in the school. And these were white kids. And so I didn't get the label until we kind of had a meeting about it at recess one time. It was like, what are you? Again, with that, what are you question, right? And I'm like, what do you mean? Like, no one's ever asked me this before because I've only interacted with family. What are you? I don't know. What do you mean? And I actually had to go back to my parents and be like, where am I? Because the students are asking and I need to report back, you know? And I think it was from, I'll never forget, like just, they would play with each other's hair, you know, we're kindergartners. And the comb would just go real easy through everybody. Let me brush your hair, let me brush your hair, let me brush your hair. No, my mom said nobody plays with my hair, but let me play with your hair. And the comb is now stuck. And there was this why. We were all sitting there like scientifically analyzing, like, why is the comb in your hair when it's not in her? So going back with that story and that information to the parents and being like, what am I? And being like, well, I'm Haitian and French. I'm Puerto Rican. We're Caribbean. We're from New York. We're Americans, you know, and trying to report that back. And they're still being, but. And then one girl, I don't remember what she looked like. It was a long time ago. Was just like, you're mixed. That's what that is. That's mixed. And just, okay, finding that label and being like, and then I can play. Now can we stop this discussion and just play? Like we spent 2 recesses figuring this out, right? And then playing with that label and how it affects my, the way the world perceives me as I travel throughout, basically. I've been lucky to visit Scotland, and it was interesting to feel that experience there and to not feel, you know, the othering, being extra other overseas, except when someone has an American problem. Then it was just, I was an American, you know, then that was a problem. Then when I was in England, then it was like, oh, you have Scottish money. And that was the problem, you know, but then coming home and being mixed again, you know, but I didn't spend all my time growing up in like art. It was like a good experience there. Then we were in New York. And then again, like explaining, you're just in this mixing pot. You're in the melting pot. We had classes about it. Like I'm sure we did art classes making these melting pots, and they really wanted to ingrain in you that there's no difference here, you know, no colorism. And then as an adult, I travel the world. I go to Alabama, you know, I end up in Oregon. That's where I am now. I'm living in Oregon right now. And that otherness, that mixedness finds you again. It finds you again, and you explore, you know, how does it fit at this stage in your life? So really interesting stuff. This is my first time really getting a chance to discuss it, like I'm probably most of you. So interesting topic. And yeah, I think we really peaked on a lot of it in our yoga training too, because obviously that's how we met, me and Marc, right? And this came up a lot, being in a room of like dozens of shades of brown, and how it affects how we navigate through the world. So thanks for coming to join in the chat.
Thank you, Cleo. I appreciate how you can take us on the journey around not just the story of your life, but even the kind of the joyful places, and then to recognize where, you know, the heart gets stuck also in some of those places, and some of the confusion. And I feel like that is, in some regards, what we all had to navigate at some point was, are we these fragmented beings that once we realize and hear the story, oh, I'm not like others who are, in a way, have the privilege or luxury of being the dominant race. I have to figure out, am I sewing these pieces together, or do I choose one? Okay, I'll be more of my white mom's side. Maybe I'll be more of the Jewish part of my white mom's side. And like I shared in my story, that was easier for the earlier part of my life. Or am I going to eventually, you know, learn more about my Japanese side? Which one? You know, in my case with my parents separating, it sounds like with the parents, I think did everybody else's parents stay together on the panel? No. Okay. So there's been, I know Nikki's has. Yours did too, Rachel? Oh, cool. So we've got a mix. We got me and Cleo, our parents didn't, and then we got Rachel and Nikki. See? So it's interesting. What happened for us was we had to come to some kind of epiphany or revelation about, what does it mean for me? How do I embody this experience and step forward? So I'm curious, from our panel, we heard some of this in their stories, but what was that defining moment for you? Or at what moment did the fragmented pieces no longer felt like broken pieces? It now felt like we're making a collage or a quilt, or it really is, I am a whole person stepping forward. And in a way, that's now my lens for the world. So anybody want to jump in? Any thoughts on that?
I'll take this one.
Cool.
So from that little girl being say, hey, you're mixed, and then like carrying that through different literal states like Wyoming, wherever states, right? I got asked this question a lot, like, what are you, and going into different schools and, you know, constantly reintegrating myself into different little social circles. And I got tired of like trying to explain it, you know, oh, but you're not just that, you're this, but you're not just that, you're this. So I came up with this, I'm a mutt, this like script, this little thing that I could just spit out so we could move on with our life. And I don't remember all of them because I got rid of it, spoiler alert. But it was 5 things, and it was probably like French, Italian, Spanish, da 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 da. I don't know. And at some point, I started navigating myself into circles where they didn't ask me that anymore. I didn't realize that that's what was happening, but I stopped answering that question. I stopped using that script. And then when the question came at me again, I was actually really quite confused. It wasn't in the pocket. It wasn't ready. And I don't remember what happened there. I probably just did not have that conversation. I just decided to continue on that path of like, I don't need to really be around the ones who want to know so, because why does it matter? So that's kind of when I guess, yeah, it was like, doesn't parts, whatever, I'm just me.
I like that. It's like a moment where, yeah, like having to have the spotlight thrown at you or the confrontation, and in effect saying like, constantly hearing you're different than me, so I need to know what, you know, that just, I think that does something to the psyche. So to let yourself have a break from that, that sounds like that was really healthy. Anybody else have any thoughts on that?
Yeah. I've had a few moments in my life kind of be aha moments. And Marc, you and I have talked about this first one, but there's a term in Hawaii and it's hapa. And hapa is, you know, a shortening of hapa haole, which means half white, half typically Japanese. Because of the culture of Hawaii. And when I was growing up in San Francisco, there were a lot of people that would frequent Hawaii, or a lot of Japanese Americans that had family in Hawaii. And in our small community, hapa became very common. Like, I have a hapa child. My child is half. And it just kind of became synonymous with half Asian. And when I heard that word for the first time, when I really could comprehend what it meant, I felt for the first time like I had a label for myself, that I didn't have to do that. You know, Claire, you were talking about explaining, oh, well, I'm this and my dad is this and my mom's that. It was just, I'm hapa. And if you don't understand that, you can go Google it. Like, it was a very easy way of just labeling myself. And then as I got older, you know, I was in various discussions about hapa being appropriated, about, you know, having this be a strictly Hawaiian term, that maybe we're not supposed to use it, that maybe we need to know a little bit about the history before we use it, or just be really cognizant and intentional about the way that we use it. And so that's like another discussion for another time, but just something that I've been thinking about. And then more recently, I would say, you know, I think I've had this experience with, or I've had this conversation with other half Asian people, where we can be white appearing to some and really Asian appearing to others, or some people who are around mixed people a lot can look at us and identify us really quickly. And kind of that identity game that people play, like, really messed with my mind of like, well, am I more Japanese, you know, because I can speak the language, or am I not Japanese enough because I don't live? Am I not white enough because I don't have blonde hair? And basically had like the dream my entire childhood of wanting to be an Olsen twin. Like, I would do anything I could to be blonde and white. But then am I being disrespectful to my mom who immigrated here? And, you know, and so there's always this constant, I'm not enough, you know, for one side or the other, kind of that fragmented thinking. And then Atlanta happened, the Atlanta shooting happened. And it was made extremely clear to me in that moment that, like, I couldn't ignore, like, no one could tell me that I was not Asian enough, because at the end of the day, my entire community was being impacted by this like racially motivated incident. And also when COVID happened and Trump was calling it the China virus, the Kung flu, like it became unavoidable. Like even if I wanted to fake it and say, oh yeah, I'm full white and I'm not any of this or whatever, like I just really couldn't avoid it anymore. There were people that were a part of my family that looked like me that were being targeted and impacted really directly to a point where it was unavoidable. And so I would say in those moments also, like I kind of had a moment like you, Cleo, where it was like, I can't be around people that don't realize that this is something that impacts me. Like there was someone that was kind of in my life who, you know, asked me what was wrong. And I was like, well, Atlanta, like it's so, and she was like, well, what does that have to do with you? Like, it was very clear that there were people that just would not ever understand this double life that basically I live and breathe every single day. And that informs the decisions I make. It creates the lens in which I see my world through. It, you know, the code switching that I have to do when I'm with either parent or either family. And I think it's become, I mean, I'm in Denver. Denver is not San Francisco. It's not very diverse. It's probably one of the reasons why our business has been so successful here, is because a lot of the folks of color here feel like they're not represented in kind of the mainstream Colorado viewpoint, I guess. And so just really realizing, yeah, like what does my body look like and how can they hold me? They can hold me by acknowledging that my life of duality and ambiguity is a gift, and that they need to like accept that like you know 100% of me, and kind of understand that those sides of me make who I am and why I'm unique. And so I would say that those were kind of like the top two that pop out into my mind of things that were really kind of aha moments for me. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Nikki. That's, you know, what comes to mind is thinking about often what we see, and we certainly saw this during Black Lives Matter, is people who would stand up as allies to others to help support. We saw that during a lot of the Asian hate activities where there were allies coming forward. In some regard, you became an ally because of your own infusion of race, you know, within you, that people maybe didn't even recognize. It's actually also personal. So it's like when we're both an ally and experiencing it personally. And I just was thinking how the more we can switch our vantage point, we might be able to build that more empathic way with one another versus siding with one another. Why should you worry about that? Like that to me breaks my heart when I hear that. Why wouldn't we worry? Even if I wasn't part Asian, but for some reason we do that, right? So somehow though, when it's our own pieces that we're talking about, I think it strikes a different chord. So thanks for sharing all that. Rachel, did you have anything you wanted to add to that thought?
Yeah, I would say that, you know, the whole, like I said, the question of who you are more so came in my, you know, my early 20s and things like that. I was already, you know, an adult, but I would say that for that, I've never been, you know, afraid to, even when I got the question, answer the question of, oh, I'm half Hispanic, you know what I mean, and half Black. It was always feeling proud of that. And then I think journeying further into adulthood, when my parents started, well, really my father started doing family tree and really diving deep into our roots and where we come from and who we are, that you can feel proud and more so stand tall. And when people say, you know, what are you? Who are you? Where does your family come from? You know, and so those questions being answered, I think, is a really big part of who I am now. And I'm really grateful to my parents for for figuring that out. When you speak to my grandmother, she remembers so many things about coming here to this country and how hard it was for her, even to the point where she had to split her children up at one point. She couldn't come with all of them right away. It just wasn't at the time something that they could do. So she had to leave some of her kids back home in Panama and then come back a couple of years later, to reunite her family. And so that was a really difficult thing, so much so that it still, I think, affect them as adults today. And so, when you think about immigrants and all the hardships that they have to go through just to come here and supposedly America make a better life, a better way. But then when you're in America, you're kind of like, is it really a better life or a better way? Especially when you look around you and sometimes you feel like you can't relate to anyone, definitely depending on what state you live in, and but yet at the same time, you look around and some of those people are going through some of the same things as you because their families came here from somewhere else, so yeah, that's what I would say.
Thank you, Rachel. I like the first thing you started to talk about too, is more of the, almost like the pride in the mixtures. And I do feel that there's something about that too, that we can all relate to on some levels, like recognizing that whatever we are, whatever our makeup is, it's something that we can be proud of and we can step forward with. And if, maybe at some point in life, it felt like we didn't fit in. We found our own way or our own voice or our own method, whether it's like Nikki said, finding that HAPA term. And it's funny that we were like looking for a label, but in a way I get it, right? Because it was just like, I don't know. And like Cleo with having that story ready to go, like her elevator pitch, ready to tell people. But at some point it's like, yeah, how do we help each other recognize we're all in this journey together? We've all got some story of hardship, and maybe because of our ability to resolve that for ourselves, is there a chance that motivates us to be of service somehow in the world? So I want to hear from anyone who's joined in the call. And if you have any thoughts or any experiences, and if it's something that we talked about or just something we didn't talk about that you wanted to include, we'd love to hear from you.
First of all, hi everyone, I'm Eliza. Use she, her pronouns, longtime friend of Marc's. I born and raised in San Francisco. 23andMe said I'm 100% Chinese, but I am Asian American, and so even though I don't have like a mix of race, I do have the same experience about not fitting in. Because my same with Nikki, I was raised speaking Chinese, and even though my mom understands English, if I speak to her in English, she'd be like, "Why are you speaking to me in English? Why speak to me in Chinese?" And I really appreciate that, because now I could carry conversations. I really appreciate that, even though I never went to Chinese school. But it's just one of those things where even though I'm not mixed, because of the different cultures, I feel more Chinese than some people, some Chinese people, I guess, born. I don't know, is that bad to say? But you know what I mean? Like, I just feel closer to my Chinese roots, I guess is what I'm trying to say. But also I'm really close to my American roots too. So there's always like not really fitting in. And like master and language too. Like I feel like I'm not good at either, so there's a bunch of like not fitting in. And I think all of us probably have that experience one way or another, right? Be it gender or race or just or sexual identity, anything, right? I think we all have that experience. But I was wondering, I know even for me, I get asked the whole, "Oh, what kind of Asian are you?" And they was like, "Oh, are you Korean? Are you, are you Japanese?" No one really ever gets Chinese, which is funny because I'm 100% Chinese. So I get that too, and I was always like, "Oh, it's like I get asked that question again." But while I was listening to everyone share, because we all get that question, a lot of you guys got that question. I wonder, like, oh, maybe it could be an invitation for us to tell our story, right? Because if they're not talking to us, if they're not asking us questions about our background, how would they learn so that we can all be included? All right. So maybe I was just thinking while you were sharing that, like, I understand growing up is kind of negative for like a white person to ask us, or anybody, like, oh, what are you, right? But maybe we could see it in a different way, be like, oh, this is an opportunity for me to teach them about my background and about my experience. So I don't know. I was just thinking about that when you're all sharing. Thanks for sharing, by the way. I do have one comment to make. I didn't know the term Papa was from Hawaii. I've heard about it. I don't know if some of you have heard a long time ago. There was an Asian Avenues website, which is like mostly for Asian people, to like a Facebook for Asian people before Facebook came around, or before MySpace came around. And a lot of people use that term a lot, Papa, which I always thought was half Asian, part Asian. That's what I always thought it meant. But I don't know. I didn't know it was from Hawaii. I didn't even know that like is a cultural appropriation from that. So anyways, yeah, so that is my comment.
Thank you, Eliza. I'm glad you added that to the mix of our conversation, is like even being 100% of one race coming into America, and it's kind of the cultural mixtures create something. And we're still like, well, yeah, which one am I more? So I really appreciated that. That was awesome. I see Mia put in the chat, and I think because you're in a car, I'll go ahead and I'll ask this question because I love it. She says, or she asks, where do any of us think this conversation about being mixed will go? What does the future look like for the next generation of mixed children? And I'll just share a second about that. In the beginning of our conversation today, I think it might have been before you joined in, Mia, there was an article that I read that said a statistic that somewhere around the year 2045 or something like that, there will be a majority minority in the US. We're going to reach a point where it is unavoidable that the idea of mixedness and the mixtures of cultures, I think it's like the conversations are going to get almost like what Eliza was talking about. The more education that happens with us talking about it, the more media starts talking about it in a positive way. I mean, I feel like I saw that happen with the gay revolution. Like for, so many years, it was not talked about, not okay. Then it started making it into, now it's like normal to show up in a TV show topic, like some random TV show, all of a sudden there's like a gay character or there's a gay segment. And I'm like, wow, that never happened. So I'm wondering if that's what will happen through more of these conversations. It will, I don't know if the right word is normalize, because what is normal, but it will maybe modernize our human experience. Anybody else want to comment?
Yeah. Two things. Number one, like, I'm sure that as mixed people, we're very good at looking at kind of the both and of a lot of things. And, social media is something that I do for my work. And there's certainly pros and cons to social media. There are definitely things that are a little bit more toxic, a little bit more, predatory, even some folks would say. But there's also so much magic around social media in terms of that representation piece that you were talking about. And as, social media and digital media in general becomes, scarily larger parts of our lives, and even accessing younger and younger people, being able to see like the representation of folks that look like you and that are in communities like you and are excited to be a part of those communities is something that I'm really looking forward to. Like I'm on TikTok, and to be able to find like literally like queer half Japanese TikTok. Like it's something that I could have never imagined to be able to find. And that's really exciting. And to the point about the future for the next generation of mixed children looking like, I'm not with child right now. Hopefully in the future, I'll be able to conceive and have children, and that would be really great. But something that I'm feeling as someone who is now, I was born to a native speaking Japanese person, and absolutely I would call myself bilingual, definitely grew up speaking Japanese, but I'm not a native speaker in the sense of I didn't immigrate here from Japan, and teaching my child who will also be mixed, not with another Japanese side, but mixed in general, like kind of got me into a little bit of a tailspin. Like, okay, well, like they need to go to a Japanese preschool and they need Japanese nannies. And what am I going to do to improve my Japanese language so that they can be mixed? And in the process of doing that, I realized that I am pushing kind of like what mixedness or what being Japanese really means to a child that's not even born yet. And like, what do we do as parents or community members to like really validate that being mixed is more than speaking the language or even being a part of the culture? Like there are transracial adoptees who grew up here that are completely torn from their cultures. Does that make them less Asian, or does that make them less of where they came from or who their identity? And so just really trying to hold space. That mixedness can look like so many different things, and that doesn't necessarily mean speaking the language or growing up celebrating the holidays. And absolutely, I can do my best to expose my child to the beauties of Japanese culture that I was privileged enough to grow up with. Yes, but to push this kind of like pressure onto them of they need to do these things and that thing, or otherwise they're not mixed enough for, I'm like, what am I doing? Like I'm perpetuating the harm that maybe that was done to me maybe. And so just being cognizant of that moving forward. And Rachel, I'd also love to hear your thoughts being a parent of mixed kids too, like what you are instilling in them or talking about to give them kind of the power to define what mixedness looks like themselves.
My kids are still pretty young yet, but I would say that going forward, it's definitely important for them to know their history. Like I was saying below, there's power in knowing all about your history. And I think one of the things that gets to me is when you talk about the various school districts and academia and what they're trying to pull from our children and what they're teaching them in terms of their history. They're trying to take a lot of Black history from the schools and other types of history. And that is really, really bothersome, because not only is it where most of us came from, but what are our kids supposed to know other than what they're learning at home about the celebration of who they are? You know what I mean? And so I think that, going forward, community in schools, everything, it's going to have to be the conversation of how do we change academically what we're teaching our children, and bringing their awareness to things other than just what they're seeing on TV with these movements, Black Lives Matter, all these various things happening, and what you're telling them at home. You may say, okay, it's Black History Month, right? And you're teaching your kids about that at home, but then they go to school and it's not even in their textbooks, so that it's very important, I think, to keep, the core of who you are and your history in front of your children as you're raising them.
Yeah, I don't have kids, but I agree with Rachel, and to kind of comment on what Nikki said, I think part of why, and I could totally wrong if you let me know if I'm wrong, but I think part of the reason why you're like, oh, did I speak Japanese, blah, blah, because I feel like for me, they don't teach their Chinese history much in American school, right? So I feel like I lose part of that when I'm not interacting with my Chinese family, especially now when I'm not married to a Chinese man, he does not speak Chinese. I could tell when I'm trying to communicate with my parents that my Chinese have deteriorated just by that, right? And I'm like, oh no, So it's like a little part of me that I feel like I'm losing. So I understand if you guys want to pass that on. I get that, or like just for them to understand where I came from and where my parents came from. I think that's, like Rachel said, I think that's very important, because your history and your background is very unique, right? So it's good to, even if for someone like me who's just Chinese, it's that like my dad also had to immigrate from Myanmar, Burma separately, because he had like 9 siblings. They had to be separate and like immigrate from China and then Hong Kong as people and stuff like that. So it's just like all just that is unique to my family, and I think it'd be nice for like my kids, whoever have any, to understand like, look, my dad was the first one to immigrate with my mom to America, and then they sponsored all the relatives here, and now we're here, and we have this livelihood with him, right? So I think it's good to talk about it, and not necessarily to like push on them per se, but just for them to not forget where they came from and where like our personality came from and where our beliefs come from, you know. So just like it's hard, but I think there could be a balance, and I think that's what's great about the future is that more and more people are being acceptance of that. So even so, like I imagine, you know, if I ever have kids, they're gonna grow up and think like gay is completely normal. I see it on TV, you know, my uncle's gay. You know what I mean? Like it's very normal. Like who cares, right? It's like it's not even it's just part of the conversation. It's just part of life, you know. And I think race would be very similar too. I mean, there's always going to be some people who'll be like, you know, those people. But I think the younger generation are going to be more and more accepting. And my husband always says that the generation after next is always smarter and always more open-hearted. And I really do think and hope that that's the case because we're more mixed, right? Being born and raised in San Francisco, I don't think gay is weird ever because that's what I'm used to, you know, and there's a lot of diversity. But when you grew up in a location that didn't have either, you wouldn't really understand, you know. So I think when we're all more mixed like that, I think there's hope for the future is what I'm trying to say. Long story long, that's my point.
Yeah, thank you, Eliza. I do think that that's a major component is the education, it's the storytelling, it's the sharing, it's being able to, again, as I said earlier in the beginning of the talk, trying to find a way to build empathy. And so education and empathy, there's something about those connecting together. We have 1 minute left, and this has been a really exciting, dynamic conversation that I almost feel like we just are getting to the starting point of. So it's something I had a sense could happen because there's so much to this and so much more to talk about. Again, it's been a topic for decades, but in terms of it actually being a full coming out of a conversation, I think there's a lot of room for it to still be shared. And I think by doing things like this, we do pave the way for others to recognize it and not look at it and be, what is that? But they'll say, I know what that is. I actually understand it because I understand myself more. And what helps us understand ourselves more? Yoga. No, some kind of practice that can actually, get us in touch with our true nature. Because when it all comes down to it, we all have bones and blood and muscles and thoughts and feelings and emotions, and that can become the thing that gets the most tangled up, whether you're the same race, whether it's your own family, or it's people who are of mixtures. It's the real pandemic of our global experience. But the more that we can talk, educate, connect, and empathize, I think that's when I have more hope for all of us. Cleo, I know your hand's been up, so before we go, I wanted to give you an opportunity to chime in.
Okay, cool, because like everybody said so much and it just generated so many thoughts. So Nikki, I have a TikTok for you. Let me send it to you. It's about a person coming first generation and they're like, okay, so why mom you want me to be Japanese? Well, I don't know what, I'm just using yours as an example, forgive me. When you brought me to America, I'm American. So it's interesting because you're like grateful for that education and it's like, but how much do you want to push it? I don't know. Good luck. I'll send you a talk. Rachel, hello. Yeah, hiding our history. I found out I was indigenous in the past like 2 years. I didn't know that. They told me I was extinct. So that's kind of important. And then to Mia's question about the next generation, and it's what Mukunda just said about us being mixed, we're both allies and we're participants at the same time. And I think that's kind of where it's going to go. Kind of my other panelists were saying the same thing, and Eliza, you spoke to it as well. But just that really interesting concept of like, you are also an ally. That gives you a unique perspective instead of trying to convince someone to become an ally or to empathize with our situation. We have both mixed already. So that should flourish into something mycelial and fantastic.
Thank you, Cleo. That was amazing. You had to get a lot into your shares. Very, very good. I love it. Well, this has been 100% mixed, and I think we had a lot of great conversations in this short time that I would love to hear more. So please send us a message if you want to have 100% mixed part 2. And for those who are watching this as a recording, thank you for watching the recording, and send us your thoughts. You can always get in touch with us at makundastudio.com, hashtag makundastudio on Instagram, and info at makundastudio.com will actually reach Eliza, and we'll, yeah, hopefully be in touch again soon. Thank you all so much.
Closing slide, or did I make that up?
I had a closing slide because I just wanted to appreciate and honor Happy New Year coming up. It's the year of the tiger. Passion, communication, relationship. We'll see what all's in store. All right. Thank you all so much for joining. Thanks for my panel, Nikki, Rachel, Cleo. I am so grateful for you being here. Thanks for all the guests that were here, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you, Marc.
Adios.
Thanks, everyone.
Shalom.